Hey guys, I wasn't sure if I was going to make a video on this. Part of me didn't really want to do or say anything because it just felt a little bit too hard. But what I really wanted to do is I wanted to share with you guys a few of the biggest lessons that I learned from John Meadows over the years that we knew each other and became close friends. I wanted to give you all an insight into the guy, not just as a bodybuilder or educator, but as a human. So growing up, I would trawl the internet and bodybuilding forums, reading absolutely everything that I could about muscle building. My personal favorite was T-Nation. It seemed a little bit more hardcore and blue collar than the pristine, clean, corporate feel that I got with websites like bodybuilding.com. In there, I started to come across a lot of interesting articles from this guy, John Meadows. I remember the first one that I came across. It was all about rear delts. And he spoke of how he'd blasted his rear delts and was then so surprised at how much he was unable to press properly afterwards. And it got him thinking about exercise selection and the stabilizing role that the rear delts play. Now, the first thing that stuck out to me then was, man, this guy's a thinker. He's analytical. Whether he's right or wrong didn't matter. Just here was a guy who was genuinely curious and open-minded with his approach to training, and he was excited about sharing whatever he learned. You could just sense that pure love he had for it all. And it wasn't in the pursuit of fame or money. It was just a guy who's here sharing what he loved with whoever cared to read about it. So over the years, I would continue reading all of his other articles and watching his snippets on YouTube and listening to all his different podcast interviews. And I found it all so fascinating. So in late 2013, I decided to send him an email. I wanted to learn from him directly, but I didn't really have the means or finances to go and see him. So instead, I suggested that I manage a workshop for him here in Australia. Now, I was maybe 22 or 23 at the time, with absolutely nothing behind me, but he agreed to do it. If I remember correctly, I think that might have been his first time out of the United States. And I really couldn't believe the guy would place all of that trust in me, who's got no experience whatsoever in organizing and hosting a workshop for him in this foreign country. But he backed me 100%. I couldn't afford his flights or his day rates, but had to find a way to make it all happen. Now, I'd like to say that things went smoothly, but of course these things never do. My first plan was to do a couple of events. One in Melbourne, right here where I'm based, and another one up in Sydney to try to help make ends meet. So I messaged this guy that I knew up in Sydney, and I asked him if he'd be interested in having John out at his gym so he could just help share the cost a little bit. Now, this guy was very interested, and then he just ghosted me. I didn't think much of it, but a few weeks later, I'd found out that he'd gone straight to John, offered him more money, and was trying to undercut my event and squeeze in before my date, which of course John had agreed to do. Now, I panicked. I went to John and told him the whole situation, and he was pissed. See, he didn't realize that this other guy had gone behind my back. He was under the belief that it was all part of the same tour, and we were working together, which is why he agreed to do it in the first place. Now, being the man of integrity that John is, he did everything in his power to make sure that my event was a success. Now, he didn't want to sabotage his other events, and neither did I, but he made sure that I was treated fairly and wasn't stepped all over, and was able to promote my event early and sell it out well before the Sydney event. Now, this of course upset the other guy a fair bit. And this was my first look into the type of guy that John really was. Because this really wasn't his problem. He's still getting paid by both of us either way. Why should he be risking his reputation or upset this other dude who was also a very, very, very well-respected coach within the industry? Why would he risk all of that just to help me out, just some no-name kid who's just some personal trainer in a commercial gym? He did it because it's the right thing to do. And I thought, here's a man with deep-rooted values and loyalty, who stands up for those who can't or won't stand up for themselves, and who fights back against bullies. I'll never forget that chance that he took on me and the belief that he had in me. And I did absolutely everything that I could to make sure his time here was well worth it. Now, thankfully, the event was a humongous success. More than anything, though, I was just excited to be able to spend some time with a guy who I'd been looking up to for so many years. It was that event and his belief in me that gave me the confidence to start doing a lot of what I do to this day on social media with regards to content creation. Now, a few years later, we decided to do another event out here again in Melbourne. By this time, I'd built my brand and reputation up within Australia quite a bit, and he knew that he could rely on me to not just be managing the event, but to actually participate alongside him as a presenter. Now, that meant the absolute world to me. So he gets on another 20 plus hour flight out here to Melbourne, Australia, and I'm there to greet him at the airport. I know that he's tired and he's worn out, so we really don't say that much at all. We make our way to my car, and just in that short little walk, he's already just drenched in sweat. And I knew he would not be prepared for the Australian heat whatsoever, because it was right at the end of summer. And he'd be coming out from winter back home in Ohio. So we get to the car and we sit in silence for a bit just while he recollects himself and cools down. And then he breaks the silence and he asks me something that I could not have anticipated. He says, "Eugene, what am I going to do about money, man?" Now, I was so shocked because here is a guy who by every metric was a success in fitness and bodybuilding and business as a whole. He wasn't really into YouTube a lot back then, but he had all of his programs, his membership sites, his ebooks, and he had his hand in a couple of other supplement and food businesses on the side as well. At the time, he'd also just been listed in Forbes magazine for all of his successes. So really, John is the last person I'd ever expect to ask me, I think I was 25, 26 years old at the time, for business advice as we go down the highway in my beat up Mazda 3 with this glowing check engine light that I really couldn't even afford the service for. So as we start talking about the state of his businesses at the time, it really hit me. Whether we're talking about the $1 million deals that he was dealing with and all the hard decisions that come with it, or just a couple of $100 in rent payments, financial issues will never really leave you. He taught me that if you're chasing dollars, you're running a race that you can never win. That day, whether he realized it or not, John taught me the real value of money. People often see money as this end goal and often wind up using people as a means to get to it. John was wired very differently, and he helped me see that light. Money is the means to a very different end goal. It was around that time that I started to shift my focus away from thinking about money as something that I had to gain for the sake of gaining it, so I could afford a house or afford nice things, or so I could go on a holiday or anything like that. And I started to see it more as something that I needed to gain as a means to do something more. Things like workshop tours around the world, they're not cheap. Building an app or a website, that's not cheap. Content creation like this isn't cheap either. I mean, they do have the potential to make money, but the more you earn, the more you can now invest in actualizing whatever it is that you really want to do and what really matters. Because you're not leaving this world with any of it anyway. But every single day you have the ability to leave the world better for having you in it. Through your interactions with others, through the connections that you create, and through the ideas that you manifest into realities. Money can help you do that, but chasing money itself is a trap that will leave you very unfulfilled if you start stepping over what really matters in order to get to it as the end goal. I started to understand this concept a little bit more over the next few years, but it wasn't until we were on tour together again, this time in Manchester in the UK, where it all started to click. You see, I've seen every single iteration of John's lecture material. He runs it all by me every single time since he first wrote it back in 2013 or 14. He'd always be so excited to share with me all the latest research or developments in his training philosophies, but it was this time, in 2019, that he had this different energy about himself. He could not wait to share his material on Maslow's hierarchy of needs and his thoughts around the human need for connection, love, and belonging. and how all of that can positively influence your health, fitness, and bodybuilding goals. He and I would always talk about the old stories of how we shunned a lot of people in our lives through our time in the sport, or of a lot of broken relationships and mistakes that we made. But it wasn't until now that I'd seen him really put together a framework that he was really proud of sharing in an event where people were coming along for training and nutrition content. It was really exciting. And you could see just the way his face would light up as he would talk about people and family and relationships. You could just see just how much he cared about these things and how those were the real ends that we should be working towards. In every single interaction I ever watched with him, whether it was towards me or towards the people that we'd be meeting on the road, he was always excited to help them out and to leave them better for having been around him. He would have this really infectious quality about him that would just resonate warmth within you when you were in his presence. Now, I think this is something that people lose sight of or don't really ever appreciate, but it really is the only thing that matters. No matter your circumstance, no matter who it is you're dealing with, always treat them with respect and courtesy, and try to leave every interaction or experience better off for having you in it. Life is all about the connections that we make and the legacy that we leave behind after we're gone. John was a man who truly lived and breathed that lifestyle. And I don't really know how to end this, apart from saying that while his presence will be missed within the industry, his impact and legacy will live on through the way that we continue to interact and connect with each other.